B and C were pretty much the same. You can see it's the canopy, we call it razorback. The canopy runs into the back of the fuselage. Later, the D model, the canopy is above the fuselage, and of course that gave us much greater visibility if we could turn the neck around far enough to see. But I always have to modify. Folks say, "What's your favorite aircraft?" It'll be the P-51 Mustang, but with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. There's our B-25 taxiing back. But the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine gave us speed, range, and altitude that no other of our American aircraft had. You know, we built it for the English, and they put the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in. We said, that's a good thing. And we put it to use. It's hard to tell somebody that feeling, but that aircraft with the laminar flow wing was just something that we had not had and experienced before, and so it made a wonderful platform for us to do the job. And I might just a little aside, someone say, well, why the red nose and the red tail? I mentioned 4 groups were picked to begin the escort work, and the gunners on the bombers needed to recognize when we approached that we weren't German Focke-Wulf or Messerschmitts. Up in that altitude, the aircraft don't look that much different. And so of the 4 groups, one had a yellow tail, one had a candy stripe, one had a checkerboard tail. 332nd Fighter Group ended up with the red tail. So that's how that story came about. So those gunners knew we were friendly. We were coming there to give them a hand, help save lives, not to get in their way of accomplishing the job that they had to do. But the Mustang, as I say, gave us an aircraft that was good from the ground to 35,000 feet. And it's interesting, the B-17s could fly higher than the B-24s, so we often wanted to be even a couple thousand feet above them, so it gave us even a better craft than the P-47 to escort B-17 groups when we were signed with them. So P-51 became a signature aircraft that all old fighter pilots still love. And with that engine, it can fly over. You don't need to look up. If you've had the experience, you know it's a P-51 with the Rolls-Royce engine. And that was, and by the way, folks often wonder about, we were with the 12th and 15th Air Force, the 12th Tactical Air Force and 15th Strategic Air Force out of the Mediterranean Theater. The 8th and 9th Air Force are the folks doing the same type of work but flying out of England.
Absolutely, Charles. We're actually going to come to that, especially your point about saving lives. So part of the tactical direction I think with the Tuskegee Airmen, particularly like with the 15th Air Force in Italy, was really kind of close escort with the bombers. And I think probably that tactic probably saved the lives of many folks who were flying the bombers, right? And enabled them to come back to the U.S. after World War II. And, one of the talking points I had with Don Hines a number of years back, sitting under the left wing of that P-51, is, he said that sometimes the Italy and the Mediterranean was characterized as, well, maybe it wasn't as ferocious or there weren't as many liftoff aircraft, but actually the research showed that a lot of the experts that were in like JG-26, 53, and 77, the really top liftoff pilots were actually spending time in Italy. So they were fighting against the varsity. And I think it showed a lot of great discipline, escorting the bombers and saving lives rather than kind of chasing, 1 or 2 aircraft that may come up after the bombers. But I kind of want to pick up on your air combat experience with your FW-190 victory. So I'm going to kind of start the story. You're flying along, doing close escort, and all of a sudden you see some specks way out in the distance.
Well, that's part of the story and part of the experience, so that folks understand history. Those folks flying out of England were much closer to the German air forces, and there was great concern of the damaged had they carried it out, unfortunately they got some bad leadership from Hitler and didn't do it, they could have destroyed England. But that's a different history. But their focus was, if there are aircraft in the air, go get them. But they often left the bombers to do that. In our area, under B.O. Davis Jr., we had the idea that our job there was to save American lives, because as you know, every bomber that went down, if there was losses, usually that's 10 American. That's what we were there to do. And B.O. Davis I always say, raise second and first lieutenants that would like to become aces. Your job is to stick with the bombers, and we did that. My one victory came, and we flew generally each squadron putting up 16 aircraft, and we're flying along. Up above we're sitting up at, the 24s usually at 24,000 feet, B-17s, 26,000 maybe. If they could get higher, they had to follow the leader, but they would get up higher because they'd get out of the flag zone. The German gunners knew pretty much what altitude they were flying in at, and that flak was just like a blanket out there. You could see it. Well, had to salute the bomber pilots. We could steal our job and climb another couple thousand feet to get out of that fire burst that the ground fire was putting up to destroy our bombers. But as we went along, if our bomb group was attempt attack, the lead would dispatch whoever was needed, whichever side, and it happened that on there in August of 44 over a part of beach, our targets were a nearby rail yard and Portabeachie airdrome. And both Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitts came up into the air, and Focke-Wulf tried to approach our bombers. My element was detached and got on the tail. The bomber, things happen very rapidly. It's only a minute or two or three at the most that you're involved. But he thought he could get away by diving away from the formation, and I got on his tail, and all I could say, unfortunately, had he maybe turned to the left over the airfield, I might not have got a bead on him. He made a right turn, but put perfect, and unfortunately, the plane crashed on the airfield. I don't know whether the pilot got out and never was able to determine that. But that's the way that happens, and then it's climb back out. In my case, there was a lot of ground fire from the airfield, so I stayed at low altitude getting away, and also had a chance to fire on and put a little destruction on passing a rail yard. I saw an engine pulling in with a fuse, so I demolished the engine for a little bit before I climbed back up the altitude to head back home. But those things happen. But you have to understand what that leadership meant, that our job was saving American lives. And if some of you look in the history, it even came to the point that many of the bomber pilots, even after the war, did not know that the RedTails were black pilots, but they knew that the RedTails gave them close formation and didn't run away just because German aircraft were in the air. And it's been said that they requested the RedTails, and they ended up, B.O. Davis put by request as the name on his aircraft. By the way, I put Kitten was on mine. It was my wife's nickname, but I also said my crew chief kept that engine purring like a kitten, so put it on both sides.
That's great, Charles. Let's kind of talk a little bit as we get kind of toward the end of the war, and I think some of your service in Korea and also Vietnam. So the air battles at the end of 44 were probably some of the most fierce, because Hitler knew that if the ground forces for the Allies made it in through Italy and started to advance with the invasion, it was all over. And there were stories that said as soon as Hermann Goering saw Mustangs over Berlin, he said, we should just fold. We're done for. And so that was kind of a defining moment. But beyond your FW-190 victory that you have, this could be like the end of the day the war ended or whatever. What's kind of one thing, kind of a defining moment that you kind of remember, toward the end of the war?
Well, that question I probably can't answer directly because the gentleman you talked to earlier was there at that time. I was overseas from January to November of 44, and since the war didn't really end in the spring of 45, I missed some of those late formations, but our early were a lot of the long range we were destroying Germany's war-making potential, the oil fields, the factories and so on, where they're building aircraft and building Navy support equipment, all of that. So it was a lot of long-range, high-altitude bombing. Then we had the opportunity, if there was bad weather and bombers didn't get in the air, we also were assigned fighter sweeps. That was a great time to be able to go find an airfield or a factory, whatever you could find. If there was something moving, kill it,
take it out.
shoot it down. So the fighter sweeps were also a great opportunity. And when we look at the history, we probably destroyed as many German aircraft at the airfields on the ground as we did in the air battles. But that was a great part of our assignments. So not only doing the escort, one of my favorite missions also, the partisans in Yugoslavia protected troops, kept them out of German hands when the aircraft were lost, and it was highly classified at the time, but they had missions where they cleared a special airstrip and sent in, well, at one time it was stripped down B-17s and another time C-47s to bring back. So we helped get many of the Americans back home, escorting those efforts to bring them back out of Yugoslavia and get them back home. And those are the types of things that make you feel good about what you accomplished. And as I say, the leadership that we had. Folks, often the young folks say, "Were you scared?" I say, if you're scared, you're in the wrong business. But we had excellent training and were able to carry it out. And really, I know many of you don't know, the policy came from a 1925 War College study saying that because of our ethnicity and birth, we didn't have intelligence of the white person, we didn't have the integrity, you name it, we were subspecies, second-class citizen, couldn't do anything technical. And we dispelled those, I say, biases, generalizations, in some cases racist ideas that were part of policy. But I say we still have a long way to go, folks, because I often tell folks in the late 50s, when I was just getting out of military flying, wanted to go commercial, they weren't interested in me or they weren't interested in any of you ladies out there at that time. It took lawsuits in the 60s, but by that time I was stuck, but I had great opportunities. And it's interesting, the Army never changed the policy. Folks, the war ended. Our Air Force became a separate service. It was the Air Force that decided they needed to use people based on training and experience and where needed, not their happenstance of birth. And they're not getting enough money to keep then Lockburn Air Base open, but separate and meet their requirements. They need to integrate. Their decision was backed by a very courageous President, Harry Truman, who said, he issued two executive orders, 9981, all of the services need to integrate. Well, unfortunately, the Navy and Army didn't really get on board until Korea time frame. But the Air Force closed the segregated base July of 49. We were scattered around the world. But to show you how things go, you all know the Air Force always had a big gunnery meet to have the fighters come in and put on a show and so on. And I don't know what year it was, but finally they needed to write the history. And unfortunately, the Air Force historian The winners of the first Air Force gunnery meet in May of 1949, unknown. Guess who they were?
332nd.
Pilots, 332nd Fighter Group flying P-47Ns. Well, they found the trophy in the basement of the Air Force Museum, and a couple of the pilots and mechanics are still living, so that history got straightened out too. But even then, folks, this is important. I hope all the adults out there are mentoring some young people like this young lady up front here. That's needed so much today because even our schools aren't letting our youngsters know where technology is taking us. They're the future of our country. We need to do that. So if you don't have a youngster in your family, there might be a neighbor or down the street, find them because they need the right advice for the future of our country. But our experience, as I say, dispelled the biases and generalizations and thoughts that have become a part of Army policy, and we still have some things to fight. And am I taking too much time? Oh, he's got more questions, but for those of you historians out there, the now called Tuskegee experience should be considered in 5 phases. Phase 1, story of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the first squadron that the Army said this is an experiment. We know it's going to fail. And to tell you, I learned about the program because the mechanics, Army said we can't use a black pilot because we don't have any black mechanics. The mechanics were in training at Chinook Field, Rantoul, Illinois. Expected to fail and they didn't. They said, my gosh, we need an airfield for pilot training. Airfields all around the country, but they found $4 million to build Tuskegee Army Airfield. Pilot training began a year later there, but the 99th wasn't wanted. They were attached to white groups. Colonel Momar said, we only shot down one aircraft, so they're nice flying for mission. That's a Mustang. The Momar said they're not aggressive, only shot down one aircraft. Now, this is a challenge to your history, and if you know how things are there. I'll be patrolling Liberia. Were there any Germans in Liberia? Well, I think you understand. But that brought a hearing in Washington. Out of that hearing, they wanted to get the 99th out of combat, but they had a study done, realized their bombs on target and what they were doing was equal to the other squadrons. Coming out of Africa into Sicily into Italy, and I say there was one bit of integration because Bill Bates of the 79th Fighter Group was just glad to have more pilots than more aircraft. And in the 7-day time frame during that Anfield beach hit, 99th pilots shot down 16 German aircraft. So it's a matter of opportunity. But they're still flying the P-40. We were flying the P-39 patrolling Naples Harbor. This 332nd Fighter Group is the second phase of the experience. The 101st and 302nd Squadron. Combat ready in the P-40, you are going to do patrol. Switch to P-39. The one of the 4 groups picked to begin the escort work. P-39 was not an interceptor. They're good for ground interdiction and so on, but not good for escort. We gave the P-39 to the Russians and picked up P-47 Thunderbolts in combat and began the escort P-47. Nice sound. Eventually, in July of '44, we got the P-51 Mustang B's and C's as you see up the ramp. Later in the war, although I'd come home, they got the D model of the 51. But also, when the group got the P-51, they stopped attaching the 99th to white groups, and we ended up with 4 squadrons from July '44 on through the end of the war. And as I say, on most escort missions, each squadron putting up 16 aircraft. Many of the bomber pilots many years after didn't know that those RedTails were black pilots. But the story of the 32nd is the second phase. When I graduated, my instructor said, too bad they don't have bomber training for you guys because I think you'd make a good bomber pilot. I didn't ask him why because I was enjoying what I was doing. 477th Bomb Group Medium, B-25, training began 2 months later there at Tuskegee. 4 squadrons, and folks, with all of the necessary support. So, don't you like that sound? I think about 16 of them joining up to go do the job. That's a world Yeah. In that phase for the bomb group, I hope both of you know a little bit of history there. I think it was the Pittsburgh Courier said we were fighting for 2 victories, double V, victory against Hitler in Europe, victory against racism here at home. The bomb group didn't get into combat because we dropped a big bomb and training ended before they were fully ready to go, but they fought the battle against training. Even though the Army regulations already said there should be no segregation based on race, creed, and color, and that type of thing, Colonel Selway still said, no, we don't want to mix blacks and whites, and we don't want white soldiers saluting black officers. So he had General Hunter's okay to say on his base, trainees can only use the facilities he designated. Well, who's in training?
Yeah.
First Innocent Bomb Group. Building A is White Officers Club. You use Building B over on the other side of the field. Army rate, and back then, they took your club dues out of your pay before you got the money. So officers already had paid for their dues. The bomb group, the 477th officers knew Army regulations. Peacefully in 2s and 3s says, go to the club, the club. They were denied. Colonel Selway's upset, called them in, said, I'd like you to reread my regulation and sign that you'll abide. 101 refused, and they were immediately shipped from Godman Field, Kentucky or rather from Seymour, Indiana to Godman Field, Kentucky, behind barbed wire, dogs, guards. In fact, the German prisoners of war had more freedoms at the adjacent Fort Knox, certainly, at that time. But that brought a hearing. That hearing, I don't know, they shipped Selway off because they knew he was wrong. But the Army said, we've really got a problem. The war is over in Europe and all these pilots back from the 332nd. Well, we'll have the 3rd phase of the experience, we'll have a composite group. We'll keep 2 of the B-25 squadrons, we'll reactivate the 99th. Godman Field's too small. That's when they opened up the segregated base of Lockman Air Base, now Rickenbacker Air Base, for those who know the history near Columbus, Ohio. When training ended in 46, those of us in Tuskegee, where did we go? Lockburn Air Base in Ohio. That's the 3rd phase of the experience. But Lockburn, at the time, was under Tactical Air Command, and I guess tactical doesn't mean B-25s. I don't know what happened. But the next phase of the experience became reactivation of the 332nd Fighter Group. And those were the ones that I'd say were flying the P-47N and won the trophy for fighter gunnery in the 1st Air Force meet, but the Air Force closed Lockburn Air Base 1st of July 1949, and we were scattered around the world, for sure.
Wow. Charles, I'm going to pick up on that a little bit, right? Because we were talking about Charles A. Train Dryden last night about the movie, and Charles Dryden told me, he goes, you know, Kevin, he says, one thing about an airplane is it doesn't know who's flying it. It doesn't matter if you're male, female, white, black, Asian. It doesn't matter at all, right? All it knows is really what the pilot tells it to do. He says that's the beauty of it. It's kind of like the great equalizer. But you know, you had picked out a couple of folks here that are kind of younger, that may be interested in aviation or flying or being a pilot or something like this. What sort of advice could you give them, Charles? And then I got one more question for you about Mustangs.
Well, folks, I enjoyed a chance to talk to folks. In fact, I talked to one of the class groups that came out with the movie out the ramp. But there's a lot of things you can give them, and certainly the Rise Above exhibit has some key words that they give to the youngsters on the dog tag. But I've added 4 P's that you can take. Could see the value lessons that helped us back in our day to accomplish are still good for the young folks today. But I say, tell the young folks, perceive, prepare, perform, persevere. Perceive, dream your dreams and find your talents. And I like to add, because I love my flying, find what you enjoy doing. You don't want to have to go to work every day, but not liking what you have to do. But prepare. And unfortunately, too many of our schools aren't up to this standard. But learn to read, write, and speak well, and develop those talents that you perceive, because that's part of the future, what you're doing. But so perceive, prepare, perform. Are you doing your best? Always do your best in everything you do, but let excellence also be your goal in everything you do. That's good for not only yourself, your family, community, but for our country. And finally, persevere. We could have, because of circumstance, used that as an excuse to go off the corner and say they don't like me, they don't want me, they call me names, and do nothing. What would have been accomplished? Don't let circumstances be an excuse for not achieving. So that's what I like to pass on. Thank you. And you can take that all down and take it, because it's good anywhere you go. And it's probably also good for some adults that you might run into.
So Charles, I got one last question for you. And we saw Keith Wood and Tony Stein out kind of zooming around in the P-51, and I know it was really great timing to have them come over. But when I got here yesterday on Delta, I was going through Atlanta Airport, and I went by the lottery booth, and I saw Powerball, I think is up to like 12 million or 25 million or something like that. And I thought, if I hit that, or if maybe some folks out here hit that, especially after today, they're going to go, I think I'm going to go drop the $2 million and I'm going to go get a P-51. So it's not like you go to Home Depot to get that, right? You got to go to Platinum Fighter Sales or Courtesy Aircraft.
Platinum Fighter Sales.
So let's say one of these folks out here, could be anybody, right, winds up with a winning ticket and they say, I'm going to go buy a P-51. What's the first thing you're going to tell them to do?
Learn how to fly it.
That is a while, isn't it?
Hire a pilot.
Be careful and look at the model. Be sure you're putting your money on the right thing.
There you go.
I think that's key in everything you do. Before you spend the money, be sure you're putting it on the right thing. I think that's what I would give them. And you know what? I wish I supposedly had a pretty good education. They try to tell me, but I didn't have the sense enough to go buy a P-51 when they were tearing them up, burning them up, crushing them up, and had a bunch of them down there in Tucson in the graveyard.
$900.
I had one, but now I need to win that lottery to get it. Folks, thanks for your attention and kindness. Certainly glad, and as I say, men are a youngster because they're our future. Thanks.
All right.
Great. Thanks, Charles. And by the way, if I happen to hit that lottery tonight, I think I'm going to make you my flight instructor. So that's going to work out well. There we go. Okay, if anybody hits it, call up Charles, right? Because he's going to be your CFI. Anyway, thanks so much today. Let's give Charles McGee a big round of applause. And we'll be moving on to the next segment of our program. So thanks again, Charles.